Dr. Thomas Johnson slowly opened his eyes as the sun occasionally broke through the thick forest canopy, signaling sunrise had finally arrived. He had barely gotten any sleep the night before from all the jostling from the rough train ride. For the good doctor, this was the first time he had ever taken the southbound train from Cincinnati. The night before, it had made its way through Kentucky, and now they were somewhere in the mountain wilds of East Tennessee. Just in that moment, he felt a hand on his shoulder. "Doctor, it's time. She's not going to make it to the next stop, and the baby's coming right now." Dr. Johnson quickly composed himself and grabbed his leather satchel. It seems there was a very pregnant woman on the train, and the rough ride had triggered her water to break. Within moments, Dr. Johnson was by her side, just in time to catch the newborn baby. "Well, ma'am, you got yourself a baby gal. What are you going to name her?" he asked as the new mother held the healthy girl, and she looked up at him and said, "I'll call her Jonita." By now, the train was slowly pulling into a depot, and Dr. Johnson said, "Let me fill out this birth certificate for you." Not knowing exactly where he was, he looked out the window for some sign indicating the town's name. But, to his surprise, the first thing he saw was a brawl taking place out in the street outside of a saloon. There stood a mountain of a woman, armed with a cast iron skillet, beating the heck out of the deputy sheriff. Oh, she was getting the best of him too. But just then, another deputy ran up behind her and hit her in the head with a rock about the size of a softball, leaving her either dead or unconscious right there in the middle of the street. "Mercy me," Dr. Johnson said to himself. "What godforsaken place is this?" The train engineer, seeing that all the violence was spilling out into the streets, he feared that the train might be robbed. So he released the brakes and barreled out of the small town just as fast as he could. Dr. Johnson returned himself to the business of filling out the birth certificate, and when he came to the line indicating the place of birth, he wrote, "Hell for certain, Tennessee." I kid you not, Hell for certain, Tennessee. Now what the good doctor didn't know was it was actually called Lansing, Tennessee, a rough and rowdy town in the remote mountains of Morgan County. And it did for a time seem that the town of Lansing, Tennessee had been descended on by the devil himself. The circuit-riding preacher, A.B. Wright, once wrote in his diary about the town. In 1882, when he was considering opening up a general store in the town, "Seeing the great wickedness of this place and fearing that it would endanger the morals of my son, I'm going to have to decline going into business." Now that street fight that Dr. Johnson had just witnessed was actually the culmination of a feud that had started on Christmas Eve in 1881 in Winters Gap, Tennessee. It was at this Christmas gathering where William Potter had shot William Walls right through the heart, killing him instantly. And after the killing, Mr. Potter simply picked up his hat, finished his drink, and left the party. Now you see, William Potter was from western Morgan County, a place where only the roughest mountain men lived. And he knew that if he stayed in this rural area, his chances were good that he wouldn't be taken into custody. But at the same time, old William had a powerful, strong thirst for whiskey. And that's why he couldn't resist saddling up and riding into Lansing. As William walked into the bar with his shotgun in his hand, he was welcomed by the owners, Mr. and Mrs. Walt, as the mountain man quickly got down to the business of drinking. Just then, a newly deputized officer named Rufus Honeycutt walked into the bar with another deputy. Now Rufus was a big man, 6'3" and weighed about 230 pounds. And besides being a deputy, Rufus spent his time sawing chestnut trees that were 6 feet in diameter. Simply put, he was a beast of a man. One look at Rufus left most men with second thoughts about causing any trouble. As soon as he walked in the saloon, Rufus quickly noticed Potter's shotgun on the bar. So the lawman walked over and laid his hand on the stock of the gun. And when Potter looked up and saw the lawman standing there, the outlaw quickly reached for his shotgun. But he soon discovered that he couldn't move the gun due to the strong grip of the deputy. "Law dog, you best remove your hand from my gun if you know what's good for you," the wanted man said. And to that, Rufus just smiled a little bit, with his left hand still gripping the stock of the shotgun. Deputy Honeycutt took his right hand and backhanded the outlaw with such force that his feet lifted off the ground and he hit the floor unconscious, and all the other patrons in the bar heard two of Potter's teeth rolling across the hardwood floor. Deputy Honeycutt calmly walked over and began putting handcuffs on the outlaw. But just then, the owner of the saloon, he wasn't happy about his patron being accosted by the law, especially since he hadn't paid for his drink yet. So the bar owner quickly grabbed the second deputy and hit him in the head with a whiskey bottle, dazing the deputy just long enough for the saloon owner to hit him again, this time with the butt of his pistol. Blood squirted from the deputy's head as he hit the ground like a sack of potatoes. Deputy Honeycutt quickly spun around to help his partner, but in that moment, the bar owner's wife cracked the officer over the head with a cornbread skillet, knocking him out cold as he fell through a poker table. Quickly recovering, the mountain of a man and the upholder of the law lunged forward towards the feisty woman. But you see, the broken whiskey bottle was still scattered across the bar, and he was about to learn that it's best not to make a Tennessee woman mad. Just then, she grabbed a chunk of glass and stabbed the deputy in his face, blurring his vision as she continued whipping him with her cornbread skillet, knocking him out the door and into the streets in front of the saloon. Semi-conscious and trying to recover, Deputy Honeycutt was on one knee trying to get the whiskey out of his eyes when here she came again, running out into the street behind him. That's right, she wasn't finished teaching him a valuable lesson with that skillet, and she was just about to deliver another blow when the blurry-visioned deputy found a rock in the yard and quickly moved to the right just as she swung that skillet, and he hit her in the left temple with the rock. Blood squirted from her head as she crumpled to the ground. She might have been dead or unconscious, but that skillet was still in her hand, and the lawman wasn't about to go anywhere near her to find out. Instead, Deputy Honeycutt quickly threw William Potter over his horse and got the hell out of there. And this, my friend, was the fight that Dr. Johnson had just seen from that train as it passed. Hey guys, JD Phillips here from the Appalachian Storyteller. Today's video is brought to you by author Michael Nance and his new book, Asleep by the Tracks. I'm going to be giving away 5 copies of this book today. All you got to do is comment below where you're watching this video from, and the author himself is going to pick 5 people, and we're going to send this book to you for free. You can also purchase this book by clicking the link in the video description. And now, back to the story. Now, that was just one episode in the town of Lansing, Tennessee, or what Dr. Johnson had written on that birth certificate. Hell for certain. You see, the town was set up at the intersections of the Knoxville to Nashville Turnpike and the CNNOTP Railroad. It was here that many drifters and city folk and outlaws alike arrived by train only to be greeted by the local group of clannish Civil War veterans who spent their days cutting timber or working on the railroad and spent their nights drinking whiskey and fighting. Oh, they were hardened men, veterans with quick tempers and unafraid to fight to the death. In fact, the simple act of buying a cup of coffee in this town could be a fatal affair. A few years later, after that barroom brawl of Rufus Honeycutt at the Waltz Saloon, a visit to C.A. Quinn's general merchandise store turned fatal. Now, Mr. Quinn was a Civil War veteran who ran a unique store in town, selling coffee and caskets. Now, it was said that a man could come in trying to buy one item, only to leave in the other. The railroad that came through town had made the family rich by selling caskets that he made to northern towns. And as you know, with success in life, there often comes jealousy. And Mr. Quinn was soon to find out that selling coffee almost got him put into one of his own caskets. You see, on February 18th, 1889, a young girl named Lulu went down to Mr. Quinn's store to buy a pound of coffee for her father. And as Mr. Quinn loaded the coffee sack, it looked to be a little light, and Lulu questioned if a full pound of coffee had been placed in that bag. But Mr. Quinn was in an especially foul mood that day, and he didn't have any patience, and he told her, "You can buy it or you can leave." So, feeling disrespected, Lulu slung the coins on the counter and took the coffee. She went straight home, and after telling her brothers about the episode, they became infuriated. And after looking at the coffee in the sack, they noticed it was extremely dry. To them, it was clear that Mr. Quinn had given them the worst coffee in the store. Furious, they set out to the store with a coffee sack in hand. They were determined they were either going to get some fresh coffee or they would leave a dead storekeeper in their wake. No sooner than they entered the store, one of the brothers spoke up as he threw the bag of coffee on the counter. "Mr. Quinn, this coffee is dry and you disrespected my sister, and I'm here to tell you, we demand some fresh, green coffee right now, and we ain't leaving until we watch you weigh it." Now Mr. Quinn, he was suspecting the worst, so he agreed to provide new coffee, and he waited. And just as he placed the sack of coffee on the scales, the older brother pulled his knife and cut the store owner's throat, narrowly missing his main artery in his neck. Mr. Quinn fell to the floor behind the counter, but in an instant, he stood back up with a revolver in his hand, shooting the boy with a knife, killing him instantly. Coming to his older brother's aid, the younger brother grabbed an axe that was for sale in front of the store and hurled it at Mr. Quinn, barely missing his head. Seeing that the boy was making a mess of his store, Mr. Quinn shot him in his throwing arm, and in the stomach for good measure, just as he attempted to get another axe, sending him reeling out the front door. Both boys had set out for a pound of coffee, but instead they got 2 caskets for their trouble. It was just another day in hell for certain Tennessee.